This is our tech lead.
Hey everyone, I'm Maribeth. Like Rachel said, I'm the tech lead of Blockly, and today I am going to be talking about forking Blockly, and more importantly, unforking Blockly. So forking, as most of you may know, is the practice of creating your own copy of a repository in order to make changes to it. So forking is an important part of the open source ecosystem, but there are a lot of forks of Blockly out there that don't pull in our updates and never push their updates to upstream. So if you have a fork of Blockly and you're doing all these cool things that you come to the summit and show us, and we're like, we want that. And if you don't contribute back upstream or you don't pull in our updates, we're sad about that. So we would rather that you just didn't fork Blockly in the first place. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about why so many people have forked in the past and why you have probably been tempted to do so, but why I think that you shouldn't have to. I'm also going to talk about one of our partners who forked a long time ago and is now in the process of coming back to Mainline and how they're pulling that off. And then at the end, I will share some thoughts about moving forward. So the first GitHub fork of Blockly was created in 2013, which is impressive because that is actually before we started using GitHub to make updates. The GitHub repo was still in read-only mode, and people were already forking it. And back then, and for a long time, we encouraged folks to fork Blockly. If someone said, hey, I want to change the renderer, we're like, okay, just fork it and change the renderer. Go for it. Blockly as a library was not flexible, and we didn't provide ways to customize the appearance or the behavior of the library. But today, that's not true, and we warn you against forking Blockly today. Maintaining a fork and keeping it up to date is a lot of work, and we hope that you don't have to do that work. Maintaining it means regularly pulling in these updates, resolving merge conflicts, dealing with changes to non-public APIs that you were probably using even though we really didn't want you to. And if you don't keep your fork up to date, then you'll miss out on those new features and bug fixes that we're putting out. So here's some common reasons that we've heard that people forked in the past. So some of these, like adding custom blocks or generators, you've actually never been required to fork to do these, but that was a common model. And our documentation said, hey, fork it, put your blocks in the blocks directory. But today, we don't think that's the best choice. And in other cases in the past, if you wanted to change the shape of blocks, all of the rendering was just string concatenation. So App Inventor wanted to add their own custom shapes. They had to fork in order to change those strings. Today we have the custom renderer API, so you no longer need to fork to make changes like that. In other cases, if you want complex custom behavior, today what you want might not be possible. And that's a case where maybe you still need to fork today, but before you do that, we really hope that you'll post on the forum, you'll talk to us and say, hey, I need this feature, how do I do it? And we might come back and say, there's no way to do it, but let's work together to find a solution so that you can do it without having to fork. So now I want to talk about a project that previously forked. So this is code.org, and I want a disclaimer here. I've been working very closely with Mike on this project. Mike did not write the fork, so as I'm about to be really mean about code.org, don't blame him, okay? Sorry, Mike. So Codeorg has been using Blockly for a long time. They created their fork in 2014, but using it today has been increasingly difficult for them, because they never pulled in updates. So a lot of forks out there at least have regularly pulled in our updates, but for the code.org fork, that didn't happen. One of the reasons is because when they forked, they renamed a bunch of stuff and put things in different directories and improved the organization of the code, which is great, except that then whenever you want to do updates, you have a lot of merge conflicts, and it just never happened. So the fork was really out of date. And that means that they're missing out on bug fixes. So there were a lot of cases where there's some bug that we found and fixed, they found and fixed on their own in a different way. So now we have merge conflicts where both of us fixed a bug in different ways, and now we have to resolve that. Then over time, the fork was worked on less and less. The people who wrote the fork have left the company. Now the people who are left don't actually know how it works or what's in there. Because when Code.org needed a new feature that related to Blockly, they just added it to the Blockly namespace. So now looking back, there's a question of, oh, is this function editor? Is this a piece of Blockly that was removed? Or was this something that Code.org added? It's really hard to know if you weren't there when it was written. So that also gives problems when they come and they say, hey, how do I do this feature? We can't just tell them the answer of how we would do it today because that answer doesn't apply to their fork. So it's difficult to add new features to their applications because we can't help them and they don't have documentation for their fork and our documentation doesn't apply. So this is like a list of challenges that Code.org is facing and why they're coming back to mainline now. But I think this is also a list of things that, like, I'm talking to you now and I'm like begging you not to fork, but I know that some of you have done it and some of you are going to do it in the future, but at least like keep this in mind and think about when you fork and when you add new features, think about your future self and think about me standing here saying like one day you're going to want to undo what you're doing. Think about future you and make it easier for yourself and avoid these pitfalls. So like I said, Code.org is now coming back to mainline because of the challenges they're facing, and they have a unique approach to it. So I want to share a little bit about that in case it might help any of you that are out there thinking about coming back to mainline. So the difference between the Codeorg fork and the Google repo is quite large at this point. And it would be impossible to reconcile each difference and convert all of Code.org's applications at once. They have a bunch of different applications that they call labs. There's just too much to simply update everything in place, flip a switch, and like all of a sudden we're in Google Blockly. That would be impossible. Each lab has to be migrated separately so that each lab can be tested on its own and ensure that it's working before it's switched over to use Google Blockly. What makes this more complicated is some of the labs share code. So you also can't just migrate one lab in isolation because if two labs share some code, they would have to be updated together too. It gets tricky. So what Codeorg has done is introduce a wrapper layer. So the idea is that anywhere a lab references something from the Codeorg fork, it's updated to reference the wrapper instead. And then there's a Google version of the wrapper that uses modern Blockly APIs that's using, it's on version 9.3 of Blockly today. And then there's a Code.org version of the wrapper that uses the fork. And that way the labs don't have to change much and they can be seamlessly switched between the fork and mainline, so that it can be tested and migrated independently of the other labs. So I've been working with Code.org to make sure that the Google side of the wrapper is up to date, it's following best practices for using Blockly. So in order to pull this off, Code.org has obviously had to do a lot of work to update their labs, but we've also done work to enable this to happen for them. So we wrote the scroll options plugin. We have the context menu API that allows them to easily update the context menu options. We added, I've helped write custom fields and serialization hooks and fixed bugs related to using mobile keyboards. So these are areas where like Blockly has done significant work to help them migrate, and we also want to help you guys migrate. If you're thinking about coming back to mainline and there's something in your way, please talk to us. Like, we want to help you do this. So where is Code.org today? So they already have several of their labs that are on mainline Blockly. Like right now in production, if you went to check, they're using version 9.3 of Blockly, which is great. And then we have some more labs coming up soon. We're working on Sprite Lab. And Sprite Lab has a couple of cool features that we're excited to pull over into mainline Blockly and maybe even get plugins so that other people could benefit from the types of UIs that Code.org has designed. So Mike is actually going to present next and talk about some accessibility work that has been made possible because they're on mainline Blockly. It's made possible by the APIs that we've added and the features that they've been able to use that simply weren't present in their fork. So I want to leave you with just a couple of main ideas. So first, please talk to us before you fork, or if you already have and you're thinking about coming back to mainline. Just talk to us and tell us why and what you're thinking about. Second, if you've already forked, at least please try to update regularly to pull in our updates, because the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be to update. And finally, again, if you've already forked and you're thinking about coming back, talk to us. We want to help. So thanks. That's all I got. Any questions?
Any questions in the room? Reminder to virtual folks, I know there's a slight delay, so they're seeing the end of your talk right now, but add your questions to the chat. I see a question. Yep. Perfect. Approach the mic.
I'm just wondering, should I fork Blockly?
Please don't.
Okay.
Yeah, so I know we've talked a little bit about the Code.org wrapper, but it occurs to me, do they have two separate wrappers? Like one is the wrapper around their version of Blockly, and one is the wrapper around the mainstream Blockly that have the same API? Is that how that works? Or
Yes. So there's one API that the labs can call, and then if we're on the Code.org side, it'll call the Code.org fork APIs, and if we're on the Google side, it'll call the Google APIs. Yeah.
cool.
All right, last call for questions in the room. Great, I think Rachel will introduce our next speaker then. Thank you, Maribeth.